Saturday mornings are supposed to be quiet in my neighborhood, but mine began with a noise that made my stomach drop, a deep, scraping sound on my roof. It wasn't a branch or a bird. It was too deliberate. I set down my coffee and stepped onto the porch just in time to see my next-door neighbor, Karen, standing at the base of her ladder with a pair of garden shears raised like she was pruning roses instead of sawing through the coax cables of my satellite dish. I yelled her name, but she didn't even flinch. She gave one final snip, and the dish's feed arm drooped like a wounded limb. The TV inside flickered to black. Problem solved, she called out smugly, as if she'd just ended world hunger. I walked closer, trying to keep my voice calm. Karen, did you seriously just cut my dish cable? She folded her arms, chin lifted. It was an eyesore. The HOA voted months ago that roof fixtures have to be low profile. Yours violates the aesthetic code. There's no rule about height, I said, still trying to wrap my head around her audacity. And you can't just destroy someone else's property. Karen gave a condescending little laugh, the kind that sounds rehearsed. Well, maybe now you'll have it relocated properly. Then she clattered down her ladder, gathered her shears, and marched back to her yard as if she'd just done a public service. Inside, my screen was blank. Internet gone. I wasn't streaming Netflix through that dish. I was running my job through it. I work with meteorological data, and the dish was tied to a private research network that pulls atmospheric signals from weather satellite. It wasn't just TV. It was my livelihood. I didn't tell her that though. I took photos. The severed coax cables dangling off the roof, the ladder still leaning there, the timestamp on my phone. Then I sent a quick message to my data center supervisor. Network disruption on my end, hardware damage, ETA 2 hours. But I didn't get 2 hours. Exactly 23 minutes later, I heard tires crunching on the gravel road. 2 identical black SUVs rolled up my driveway, sleek, unmarked, and quiet. The kind of quiet that says federal instead of corporate. The lead driver stepped out, tall, clean-cut, black jacket, badge lanyard flashing Department of Commerce. Mr. Reynolds? Yeah. I'm Agent Harris, NOAA liaison for satellite security. Your feed went offline. We traced the cut to this address. We need to confirm the hardware's integrity. Behind him, another agent was already scanning my dish with a handheld meter. My brain tripped over itself. They traced it that fast? Karen, of course, was standing on her lawn pretending to prune her roses again, her curiosity radiating like a beacon. I watched her eyes widen when she saw the badges. She froze mid-snip, her mouth open. Harris looked at the severed cables, then at me. When did this happen? About half an hour ago, I said, pointing next door. My neighbor took it upon herself to enforce what she believes is a neighborhood rule. The other agent knelt by the roofline. Clean cut. Not weather damage. He glanced at Harris. We'll need to report a possible tamper. Karen couldn't resist anymore. She stormed over. Excuse me, what's going on here? That dish violates the HOA's height limit. I was helping the community. Harris turned to her slowly. Ma'am, this dish is part of a registered atmospheric research link under NOAA's experimental data program. Tampering with it is a federal offense. The blood drained from Karen's face so fast it was almost impressive. Federal, she stammered. Yes, ma'am, Harris continued, not missing a beat. We'll need to record your statement. And your tool used to cut it. Karen blinked, then gave a nervous laugh. Oh, come on. You can't be serious. It's just a dish. It's just a weather satellite, Harris said flatly. And those cables you cut transmit encrypted government data. You've effectively interfered with a federal network. I had to bite my lip not to laugh. She looked from me to the agents and back again, eyes darting. You're making this up, she said, but her voice cracked halfway through. Harris gestured toward his SUV. We can continue this conversation downtown if you'd prefer. That's when the first crack in her superiority showed. No. I mean, a look I didn't know. I thought it was like, one of those TV things. The ugly ones. Ma'am, the second agent said calmly, you'll need to provide identification. Karen's lips trembled as she fumbled in her pocket, producing her HOA badge instead of her ID. I'm on the board, she said weakly, as if that somehow negated the situation. Harris stared at the badge for a second, then handed it back like he was returning a child's toy. Good for you. You'll still need your driver's license. She finally complied, hands shaking. Meanwhile, I stood there with my coffee, trying not to look too satisfied. This was poetic justice on a level even I couldn't have scripted. After 10 minutes of quiet questioning, the agents collected the shears as evidence, took her statement, and informed her she'd likely receive a citation pending investigation. Then they turned to me. We'll have a technician restore your line by this afternoon. Keep this contact card in case the HOA tries to interfere again. Karen muttered something under her breath about overreactions and bureaucrats before retreating to her house, slamming her door hard enough to rattle her windows. When the SUVs pulled out, the neighborhood descended into a stunned silence. Curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked out, pretending to check their mail. I went inside, powered up my backup hotspot, and resumed my work like nothing had happened. But I knew Karen wouldn't stay quiet for long. By evening, I could already sense the storm brewing. A printed notice appeared in my mailbox, an emergency HOA meeting. Topic: Unauthorized government equipment on residential roofs. It was signed by none other than Karen, who apparently hadn't learned her lesson. I laughed out loud reading it. She wasn't scared, she was doubling down. That's the thing about people like Karen. Humiliation doesn't deflate them, it inflates their need for control. When I arrived at the meeting the next day, the room was tense. A dozen homeowners sat in folding chairs, whispering. Karen stood at the front, armed with color printouts of my dish, red circled like crime scene photos. This, she announced dramatically, is why we must enforce aesthetic discipline. Our community is becoming a jungle of antennas and dishes. Someone raised a hand. Karen, didn't you just get visited by federal agents? Her smile faltered, then snapped back. That was a misunderstanding. They overreacted. But if we let this slide, everyone will start mounting hardware up there. It's about principle. I waited for her to finish her speech, then stood. You cut a cable that was part of a NOAA network. The agents weren't overreacting, they were doing their jobs. Maybe you should focus less on aesthetics and more on not breaking federal law. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. You always think you're above the rules, don't you? She snapped. Only the imaginary ones you invent, I said. The HOA president, who, to his credit, looked mortified, cleared his throat. Karen, let's table this discussion until we verify the facts. Her eyes narrowed like she'd just lost a battle she couldn't admit was unwinnable. I smiled faintly. The game wasn't over yet, but now she knew she wasn't the only one who could escalate. Outside the meeting hall, she cornered me in the parking lot, voice low and venomous. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Don't think I'll forget it. I met her glare evenly. You already made that clear when you climbed onto my roof. Her lips curved into a tight smile. You think those agents scared me? You'll wish they had. That was the moment I realized this wasn't over, it was just beginning. Whatever Karen was planning next, she'd make it personal. And she had no idea that, this time, I was ready for her. The next morning started with the sound of hammering, again. Not from my roof this time, but from across the street, where Karen was orchestrating what looked like a full-scale construction project. She stood in her driveway wearing oversized sunglasses, pointing dramatically at a crew of landscapers unloading materials from a truck marked Vista Property Enhancements. I leaned on my porch railing, sipping my coffee, watching the circus unfold. Morning, I called. Karen turned, her smile tight as dental floss. Oh, it's you. Just sprucing things up after yesterday's inconvenience. Inconvenience, I said. You mean the part where federal agents confiscated your garden shears? Her jaw twitched. Don't flatter yourself. They said it was just a misunderstanding. My attorney already called them. I raised an eyebrow. Your attorney must have a lot of patience. She ignored that and gestured toward my roof. By the way, I hope you'll remove that eyesore soon. We're restoring the neighborhood's original character. You're the only one bringing down property values. I smiled slowly. Funny, I thought the guy in the unmarked SUV said it was federally protected equipment. Guess your original character will just have to coexist with science. Her smile evaporated. We'll see about that, she muttered, turning back to her workers. I went inside, pretending to brush it off. But something about the scene bothered me. Karen wasn't just deflecting, she was plotting. Every move she made had that theatrical precision of someone setting up Act 2 of a drama she couldn't resist directing. By noon, I found out what it was. My phone buzzed, a notification from the HOA board email list, which I hadn't seen since moving in. The subject line read, Urgent Compliance Notice, Federal Equipment Review Pending. The message accused me of installing unauthorized surveillance or communication hardware on private property and warned that the HOA would be filing a complaint with local authorities. It was signed, naturally, by Karen herself, acting interim communications chair. She wasn't backing down, she was weaponizing bureaucracy. I replied calmly, attaching photos of the NOAA technician's ID card and the agent's contact number. I even added, feel free to confirm with the Department of Commerce before filing anything. Then I sat back and waited for the fallout. By evening, the fallout arrived. The HOA president, a mild-mannered accountant named Greg, knocked on my door looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. I'm so sorry. He started before I could even say hello. Karen went rogue again. The board didn't approve that email. I invited him in, poured him some iced tea. He sank into a chair like a man confessing to a crime. She told everyone your dish was some kind of spy antenna, he said miserably. Half the neighborhood thinks you're working for Homeland Security. I chuckled. Well, that explains why Mrs. Patterson crossed the street instead of saying hi. Greg rubbed his temples. You don't understand. She's been calling people nonstop. She told the board you were endangering the community's privacy. She even suggested petitioning to suspend your HOA membership. Can she do that? Technically? No. But she's persuasive and loud. He sighed. Look, I'll try to rein her in, but she's convinced she's saving the neighborhood from, I don't know, espionage. I leaned back. Let her think that. The more she stirs the pot, the more attention she'll draw. Maybe someone higher up will notice. Greg frowned. Higher up. Just a theory, I said, smiling. The next 2 days were quiet, too quiet. No lawn mowers, no gossip at the mailboxes, no Karen sightings. It was the eerie calm that only comes before a storm or a lawsuit. Then on the third day, it hit. I came home to find 2 men in orange vests standing under my roof with clipboards. One of them pointed at my dish. Sir, we're here on a work order for a code compliance inspection. Got a call from your HOA about possible zoning violations. Zoning? I asked, incredulous. He shrugged. Yeah, something about restricted communication devices. Karen appeared at the edge of her lawn, pretending to water a plant that didn't need watering. Oh good you're here, she chirped. I was worried it might interfere with the community's Wi-Fi. The inspector looked from her to me, clearly regretting his career choices. We'll just take a few measurements. I called Harris, the NOAA agent, on speaker. Hey, this is Reynolds. I've got 2 local inspectors here saying they're investigating a zoning violation related to the dish. I could practically hear Harris's eye twitch over the phone. Do not let them touch it. We'll handle it. Stay put. Karen froze when she heard the voice. Who's that? Just the guy who technically owns this dish, I said. 15 minutes later, like clockwork, the black SUVs returned. The inspectors' faces drained of color when Harris flashed his badge. "Gentlemen, this hardware is under federal jurisdiction. Any interference constitutes obstruction of a government project." Karen tried to step in. "I made the complaint. I'm the HOA representative." Harris looked at her the way a surgeon looks at a fly on the scalpel. "Ma'am, we've reviewed your previous involvement. Consider this your final warning. You're lucky we're treating this as a local misunderstanding." "I was just trying to keep the community safe," she protested. "From what?" "The weather." The crowd of neighbors who'd gathered by then couldn't suppress their laughter. Even Greg had shown up, muttering something about needing popcorn. When the SUVs left again, the inspectors apologized profusely and retreated. Karen, however, stood frozen on her lawn, cheeks blotchy red, breathing hard. I thought she might scream, but instead, she did something worse. She smiled. That smile told me she wasn't done. She'd realized brute force wouldn't work. She'd moved to the shadows now. Sure enough, a few nights later, I woke up to the hum of a drone outside my window. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the blinking red light hovering near my roofline was real. I opened my phone's camera and zoomed in. It wasn't just any drone. It had a GoPro attached, recording my dish. The next day, Karen posted on the HOA message board, "Community notice, surveillance in progress." Her post accused me of covert operations and claimed she was collecting video evidence. It was surreal. I wasn't living next to a neighbor anymore. I was living next to a one-woman Cold War. Instead of confronting her, I decided to turn the situation inside out. I reached out to a friend at a local news station who covered tech and infrastructure stories. I explained the situation. Not the personal feud, just the strange pattern of HOA interference with a federal data relay system. He perked up immediately. "You mean people are cutting government cables and calling inspectors?" "Yeah, that's a story." He came by with a camera crew that weekend. I made sure to act calm, factual, understated, the perfect contrast to Karen, who was outside in full meltdown mode yelling about privacy rights. When the segment aired, the title read, "Local HOA mistakes government satellite dish for spy device. Federal agents intervene." It was 3 minutes of pure, accidental comedy gold. Karen's voice cracked halfway through her on-camera rant, and the clip went mildly viral. I thought that would end it. Most people would have crawled into a hole and stayed there after national embarrassment. But not Karen. The next day, she delivered a printed notice to every mailbox in the neighborhood, including mine. "Urgent community alert. Media manipulation by neighbor spreads falsehoods about HOA." It was 3 pages long, written in Comic Sans. At that point, I realized I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. Karen was self-destructing, and all I had to do was let her keep pressing the detonator. Still, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something even bigger. Every time I saw her pacing in her yard, phone glued to her ear, I could sense it, like a storm system building pressure. When I saw the unfamiliar van parked outside my house a few nights later, unmarked but idling too long, I knew I was right. Karen wasn't calling inspectors anymore. She was calling someone worse. And the next morning, when men in suits, not NOAA this time, walked up my driveway holding a file with my name on it, I finally understood how far she'd taken things. Karen hadn't just escalated the fight. She'd gone federal again. But this time, it wasn't a misunderstanding. This time, she'd made sure I looked guilty. The suits on my porch weren't from NOAA. Their badges read Department of Homeland Security, and that alone was enough to make my pulse jump. The lead agent introduced himself as Special Agent Larson. He was calm, deliberate, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to control a room. "Mr. Reynolds," he said evenly, "we received a report suggesting your satellite dish may be transmitting unauthorized data." My brain stalled for half a beat. Unauthorized data? From a fixed NOAA link. Larson glanced at his tablet. The report claims the equipment has been modified beyond its registered specifications. And there it was. Modified. The kind of word that gets you investigated, the kind of word that Karen would have learned from hearing the last agents talk. Who filed the report? I asked. I can't disclose that, Larson said, though his eyes flickered toward Karen's house just long enough to make it obvious. I invited them inside. Go ahead. Inspect anything you need. I've got nothing to hide. While they examined my setup, I shot a quick text to Harris from NOAA. DHS at my door. Karen 2.0 escalation. The agents moved methodically through my home office. They took photos of the relay box, the connection to my workstation, even the small UPS battery backup under my desk. I could tell Larson wasn't buying the complaint. He was just ticking boxes. You're clean so far, he said after 20 minutes. But given the report's language, we'll need to confirm with NOAA that your device hasn't been tampered with. Already done, I said. They were here 3 days ago. You can call Agent Harris. He nodded, almost amused by my preparedness. You seem used to this. Let's just say I have an enthusiastic neighbor. When they finally left, Karen was conveniently gardening again. She straightened up, wiping invisible dirt from her hands as the SUVs pulled away. Busy morning? She asked with feigned innocence. You're really leaning into this spy thriller thing, huh? I said. She smiled tightly. Maybe if you didn't act suspicious, people wouldn't keep asking questions. Oh, absolutely, I said. Maybe I'll start wearing dark sunglasses and talking into my wristwatch. Her smirk faltered for just a second. She didn't like sarcasm she couldn't control. Then, almost too casually, she said, By the way, the HOA board's reviewing your lease agreement. We're verifying if your property qualifies for a federal installation permit. It would be a shame if you were in violation. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Karen, let me make something crystal clear. Every time you think you're playing chess, you're actually playing checkers. And the people you keep calling? They're getting real tired of hearing your name. She blinked rapidly, trying to recover her composure. You'll regret threatening me. I didn't threaten you. I promised you'd get exactly what you asked for. I turned and went inside, locking the door behind me. The next few days, I doubled down on documentation. Every letter, every notice, every inspection order, scanned and time-stamped. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was building a record. Because with someone like Karen, truth alone doesn't matter. Paper trails do. On the 5th day Harris called. His voice was calm but had an edge of exasperation. You weren't kidding. DHS flagged your dish because someone submitted an anonymous complaint claiming you'd attached a signal amplifier to transmit classified data. The wording was ridiculous, but it triggered an automatic review. Anonymous, I said. Right. Harris continued, the good news is you're cleared. The bad news is the complaint went through official channels. It's public record now. I'm forwarding you a copy so you can see the statement for yourself. When the email came through, I opened it and froze halfway down the page. The description of my supposed activities was written with such overblown detail that only someone local could have made it up. It mentioned frequent rooftop adjustments, late-night monitoring, and high-frequency pulses interfering with community Wi-Fi. Karen had written it. I could see her phrasing all over it. But she'd made a mistake. The timestamp on the report was from 2:14 a.m. And the same night, I'd captured a motion alert on my security camera. Someone walking up my driveway with a phone flashlight, pointing it at my dish. I scrolled through the footage. There she was. Karen, in her pink robe and slippers, clutching a phone, muttering to herself as she filmed the dish like she was uncovering Watergate. That video was my insurance policy. I sent a copy to Harris. He replied 2 minutes later, That's more than enough. Don't confront her yet. Let us handle it. But I knew Karen. She'd escalate faster than bureaucracy could respond. And sure enough, 2 days later, she launched her next offensive. I came home to find a crowd gathered near my driveway. Karen was in the middle of them, clipboard in hand, leading what looked like a guided tour. "You see," she was saying, "that dish right there is sending signals that disrupt the aviation channel. We could be putting pilots in danger." A man in a reflective vest nodded along, probably one of her recruited experts. I stepped out onto my porch. "Karen, are you giving neighborhood tours now, or just making things up as you go?" "This is a community safety inspection," she snapped. "You should be thanking me for staging a flash mob on my lawn." Before she could reply, Greg pulled up in his sedan. He looked exhausted, like a man who hadn't had a full night's sleep since the day I moved in. "Karen," he said, getting out, "we've talked about this. You can't just conduct inspections." "I have every right," she said. "I'm protecting our property values." "By accusing people of espionage?" The crowd chuckled. Karen's nostrils flared. "You'll all be laughing when the FAA finds this neighborhood for interference." "Funny," I said, "because I spoke to the FAA this morning. They said they'll fine anyone making false claims." Her face froze. "You didn't?" "Oh, I did," I said. "And I sent them your complaint." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared at me, eyes wide, face pale. Then she turned sharply and stormed back to her house, her little audience scattering like pigeons. Greg sighed. "You've got to admire her stamina," he said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Like a raccoon with a megaphone." But Karen's silence that night wasn't a surrender, it was a regrouping. The next morning, I discovered my mailbox stuffed with dozens of flyers, all photocopies of some petition to remove unauthorized government devices. Every one bore her signature at the bottom. It was absurd. The neighbors ignored it, most tossing the papers straight into the trash. But then something strange happened. A few people started whispering, not siding with Karen exactly, but expressing unease. "Why are there black SUVs here so often? What if it's really something top secret? Could the HOA be liable?" Karen's greatest weapon wasn't logic, it was fear. She understood that uncertainty spreads faster than truth. So I fought back with the one thing she couldn't fake: evidence. That weekend, I invited the entire neighborhood over for a barbecue. Free food has a way of uniting people faster than any HOA notice. When everyone gathered, I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, smiling like I didn't have an enemy 2 doors down. After the plates were full and the gossip had softened, I called everyone's attention. "Quick show and tell," I said, plugging my laptop into a small projector. On the screen appeared the video of Karen sneaking into my driveway, flashlight in hand, recording my dish. Gasp. Whispers. A few chuckles. "She's lucky that wasn't my yard," someone muttered. I shrugged. "I'm not showing this to embarrass anyone," I said, though that was a bonus. "Just to clear things up. My dish is a NOAA research receiver, not a spy rig. The agents you've seen are technicians and investigators making sure nobody tampers with it again. Like this." I paused the video right on Karen's face. The room rippled with awkward laughter. Greg stood up. "I think it's time the board formally clarified this situation. Karen's actions don't represent the HOA." Everyone nodded. Karen wasn't there, but I knew word would reach her before I finished cleaning up the grill. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, she emerged from her house, face flushed, holding her phone up like a shield. "How dare you film me?" she shouted across the yard. "You filmed me first," I said simply. "That's different." "Yeah," I said. "You broke into my property to do it." The crowd started murmuring again, but this time the tone had shifted. It wasn't curiosity, it was annoyance. Karen wasn't the neighborhood hero anymore. She was the neighbor everyone wished would move. She stomped back into her house, slamming her door hard enough to shake her windows. I figured she'd finally reached her limit. But at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera. I opened the feed, half asleep, and saw a flash of movement near my side yard. Karen again. Only this time, she wasn't filming. She was climbing up onto my roof, right toward the dish. She was going to cut it again. Only this time, she wouldn't be the only one caught on camera. She'd be caught in the act by the same federal system she thought she could outsmart. Because what she didn't know was that NOAA had installed a new monitoring sensor on that dish. And the moment she touched it, the alert would go straight to Washington. The alert came through as a sharp tone on my phone, a sound I'd never heard before, a direct NOAA breach ping. My heart skipped once, then started hammering. The live feed on my security app showed Karen crouched on my roof, silver shears in hand, the night air glowing faintly from the floodlight she'd triggered when she climbed up. She moved with that manic determination of someone convinced she's doing the right thing, lips pressed into a hard line as if cutting through a government dish would somehow restore her pride. I stayed completely still, watching the footage. There was a temptation to run outside, yell, drag her down by force, but something told me to wait. The monitoring sensor Harris's team had installed wasn't just an alarm. It had motion detection tied directly into NOAA's security system. If she so much as touched the baseplate, that signal would travel up the chain. Karen leaned forward, bracing one knee on a roof tile, and snipped the first cable. Sparks flashed where metal met current. She yelped, dropped the shears, and nearly lost her footing. Then she steadied herself and reached again, muttering under her breath. That's when the floodlights around the house roared to full brightness. My entire yard lit up like a stadium. She froze, eyes wide, blinking against the glare. A pre-recorded voice echoed from a hidden speaker Harris's team had set up. Security breach detected. Step away from the equipment immediately. Karen stumbled backward, startled. For a moment, she just stood there, stunned, and then bolted toward the edge of the roof. But it was too late. The automated system had already triggered a call to both local law enforcement and the NOAA liaison office. I grabbed my jacket, stepped out onto the porch, and looked up. "Karen!" I shouted. "Stay where you are." She whipped around, eyes wild. "You think you can scare me with your fake alarms?" she yelled. "I know this thing's illegal." "Illegal?" I said, holding up my phone to record. "You just broke into my property again." She started climbing down the ladder, shaking from adrenaline. "You can't record me," she shouted, but her voice cracked halfway through. "Trust me," I said. "You'll want this on record." Within 5 minutes, the first siren wailed in the distance. She froze at the bottom of the ladder, realization dawning too slowly to matter. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just as Harris's black SUV appeared behind it. The flashing blue and red lights painted the whole street in chaos. Curtains glowed as neighbors peeked out, phones in hand. Deputy Caldwell, a tall woman with a no-nonsense posture, stepped out of the cruiser. "Evening, folks," she said dryly. "We got a report of trespassing and property damage." Harris joined her, nodding toward my roof. "We have federal interference on a protected device." Karen's voice went shrill. "I was protecting the neighborhood. That dish is transmitting government surveillance data. I have every right." Caldwell held up a hand. "Ma'am, stop talking. Step over here." "No. He's the one breaking the law. He's—" "Ma'am," Caldwell interrupted again, "if you keep yelling, I'm going to cuff you for disorderly conduct." Karen's mouth fell open. She looked from me to Harris, then to the gathering cluster of neighbors, her authority crumbling under the weight of their silence. "Ms. Porter," Harris said evenly, "we warned you once already. Tampering with this system again isn't just vandalism, it's a violation of federal property laws. You're lucky the automatic alert didn't dispatch higher response units." Karen's eyes darted wildly. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA enforcement officer." "Not tonight, you're not," Caldwell said, pulling out a small notepad. "You're a trespass suspect under investigation. I'm issuing a citation and referring this to the county attorney." Karen actually gasped, clutching her pearls like she'd rehearsed for this moment her whole life. "You can't do this to me. My husband's a lawyer." Then he'll know what the word felony means, Harris replied calmly. The crowd rippled with uneasy laughter. Karen's face turned crimson. This is harassment, she cried, pointing at me. He's been manipulating everyone, using that dish to spy on us. Caldwell frowned. Ma'am, the only person who's been caught on multiple cameras trespassing on private property is you. Maybe you should go home and cool off before you dig yourself deeper. That line hit harder than any arrest could have. Karen's shoulders sagged, and she turned toward her house, trembling. But before she left, she shot me one last glare. You think you've won, but you haven't, she hissed. You'll see. She stormed off into the night, her sandals slapping against the pavement. The deputies followed, just to make sure she didn't turn back around. When they were gone, Harris turned to me. You okay? I nodded, exhaling slowly. I'm fine. But something tells me she won't stop until she burns the neighborhood down. Harris gave a half-smile. We'll make sure she doesn't get the chance. We'll file a restraining order under the interference clause. That should keep her away from the equipment. Should, I repeated. He sighed. You've got one of those faces, Reynolds. People like her see calm and mistake it for weakness. Don't let her near you again. He left, and the flashing lights faded. But as the quiet returned, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. The next morning confirmed it. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop, voicemails, texts, emails. Overnight, someone had posted edited footage from my security camera on the neighborhood's Facebook page. The video showed Karen screaming under the floodlights but had been clipped right before the police arrived. The caption read, "Neighbor stages fake federal raid to frame HOA volunteer." And of course, it was posted by anonymous concerned resident. I scrolled through the comments. Half the neighborhood was defending me, the other half was convinced I'd staged everything. Karen had found a new way to fight propaganda. Greg called 5 minutes later. She's demanding an emergency HOA vote, he said, exasperated. She wants to suspend your membership entirely. For owning a dish? For endangering community safety, Greg said. And she's printing flyers again. This time they've got pictures. Pictures. He sighed. From the Facebook video. She's claiming you use strobe lights to blind her. I laughed out loud. She walked onto my roof and electrocuted herself. The lights were automatic. I know that, Greg said, but people believe what they want to believe. Just be ready tonight. She's calling a full assembly. By dusk, the community center was packed. Karen stood at the front again, wearing a crisp white blouse and a cross necklace that looked almost strategic. Her voice carried across the room as she spoke. Our community has always been safe, quiet, and respectable. But recently, one of our residents has turned it into a circus, inviting federal agents, disrupting our peace, and humiliating hard-working volunteers. The crowd murmured. She gestured toward me, her tone dripping with moral righteousness. He's weaponized bureaucracy against his neighbors. And when I tried to stop him, he orchestrated a police ambush. I stayed seated, hands folded. I'd learned something about Karen. Every time she went on the offensive, she overplayed her hand. Greg rose from his seat at the back. Karen, maybe we should hear both sides. She smiled coldly. Oh, I'm sure Mr. Reynolds will have a very polished explanation. He always does. I stood up slowly. Sure, I said. Here's my explanation. I pulled out my phone and mirrored it to the projector. The unedited footage began to play, the full version this time. It showed her climbing onto my roof, cutting the cables, triggering the floodlights, then getting confronted by the officers. Every word, every moment in perfect clarity. The room went dead silent except for the faint hum of the projector. Those are the facts, I said quietly. Everything else you've heard is fiction. And while Karen was busy rewriting reality, I was filing an official restraining order to make sure she never does this again. Someone in the audience let out a low whistle. Another muttered, "Good grief." Karen's expression froze somewhere between shock and fury. That footage was taken illegally, she snapped. It's from my own property, I said. And it's already been submitted to law enforcement. Her voice wavered. This is harassment. No, Greg said, standing now, this is accountability. The room erupted, half applause, half disbelief. Karen tried to shout over them, but her words drowned under the noise. Her face twisted into something raw and panicked, the kind of expression people wear when their authority evaporates. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard that a plaque fell off the wall. When the room settled, Greg looked at me with exhausted gratitude. Well, he said, that's one for the record books. I nodded, pocketing my phone. Oh, it's not over yet. He frowned. What makes you say that? I looked toward the window, where Karen's car was idling under the streetlight. She wasn't leaving, she was sitting there, staring straight at me, face half lit by the dashboard glow. Because I knew Karen by now. Losing control didn't make her stop, it made her desperate. And desperate people don't retreat. They reload. The next morning was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels intentional, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Even the birds sounded hesitant. I walked out to get the mail, half expecting another stack of HOA notices, but the box was empty. That was almost worse. No flyers, no anonymous letters, no Karen standing in her driveway pretending to prune imaginary plants. That's how I knew she was plotting again. Karen's silence was never peace, it was preparation. By mid-afternoon, I spotted her finally, pacing near her garage, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly as she talked. Her posture screamed frustration. At one point she stopped, looked straight at my house, and then lowered her voice, turning her back. That was all I needed to see. I went back inside and checked my security app. 2 days ago, Harris had added a new feature, real-time remote alerts from the NOAA sensor logs. It wasn't just about protecting the dish anymore. It was about monitoring interference attempts. If Karen tried anything else, I'd know instantly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this round wasn't about cables or antennas. She'd already failed there. No, she'd find another angle. Something social, something reputational. I just didn't know what. Then, around 6 that evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was greeted by a man in a suit, holding a briefcase and a clipboard. Mr. Reynolds? You've been served, he said, handing me a packet thick enough to double as a weapon. I flipped it open and scanned the first line. Petition for injunction and damages. Karen Porter versus Michael Reynolds. She was suing me. I skimmed through the rest, each paragraph more absurd than the last. According to the document, I had intentionally caused emotional distress by harassing a community member through surveillance and false reports. She wanted a restraining order, compensation for reputational harm, and, this was the kicker, removal of all federal equipment from the property. I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. This wasn't just another tantrum, it was strategic. She was using the legal system as a weapon. That night I called Harris. You're not going to believe this, I said. She's suing me. He sighed. Honestly, I'm surprised it took her this long. But don't worry. We've dealt with this kind of harassment before. Send me a copy of the paperwork. We'll make sure the agency files an affidavit verifying the installation's legitimacy. Can they testify? I asked. Absolutely. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Hope. That was a nice word, but it had no business being in the same sentence as Karen. 2 days later, I was standing in the county courthouse. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, flipped through the documents with visible disbelief. Karen sat across from me at the petitioner's table, dressed like she was auditioning for a role as concerned suburban heroine number 1. Her lawyer, a kid who looked fresh out of law school, sat beside her, sweating bullets. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. Your Honor, this entire claim is based on fiction. The dish is federal equipment authorized under NOAA's jurisdiction. Ms. Porter damaged it, trespassed multiple times, and triggered federal response teams. I have footage, reports, and signed affidavits from agents verifying every detail. Karen's eyes widened as I slid a flash drive across the table. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering frantically. The judge inserted the drive, watched 30 seconds of Karen climbing my roof with wire cutters, and then stopped the playback with an audible sigh. "Ms. Porter," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose, "this looks rather incriminating." Karen stammered. That video was edited. He's manipulating evidence. He's... Enough, the judge said sharply. You trespassed, vandalized government property, and endangered yourself. This is not a matter for civil court, it's one for law enforcement. I'm dismissing your claim with prejudice. Her face went white. With what? It means you can't refile it, the judge said, signing the order. Frankly, if I were you, I'd consider apologizing before someone files a counterclaim. I turned to her as the bailiff handed me the final paperwork. Guess that's checkmate, I said softly. Her voice trembled, but her pride didn't. You think this is over? You humiliated me in front of the entire town. You'll pay for this. Karen, I said, I already did. It's called property taxes. She glared at me like she wanted to set the air on fire, then stormed out of the courtroom without another word. For a few blissful days afterward, life was almost normal. No inspectors, no SUVs, no drama. The dish hummed quietly on the roof, pulling down data while I worked in peace. Greg even stopped by one afternoon, grinning. You know, he said, I think she's finally burned herself out. The board voted to suspend her HOA privileges for 6 months. I raised an eyebrow. You actually suspended her? Technically, we didn't have a rule for that, he admitted. But we wrote one this morning. We laughed, clinking glasses of lemonade on the porch like soldiers after a long campaign. But the reprieve didn't last. On the 4th night, just past midnight, I woke to the faint sound of tires crunching gravel. I peered through the blinds and saw a moving van parked near my driveway. No logos, just a plain white box truck. A figure in a hoodie stood by the rear doors, flashlight in hand. For a second, I thought it was a thief. Then the person turned, and the beam of light caught her face. Karen. She wasn't alone this time. 2 men were with her, hauling something out of the truck, a huge, awkward metal object I couldn't identify in the dark. They moved quickly, setting it down near the property line. I grabbed my phone, zoomed in. It was a satellite dish. Smaller than mine, newer, shinier, but a dish nonetheless. She was installing her own. At 1 a.m, I opened the window. Karen! I yelled. What the hell are you doing? She flinched but didn't stop. You're not the only one who can collect data, she shouted back. If you get to have one, so do I. Karen, you need a permit for that. Oh, I have one, she snapped. I filled out the form myself. I stared in disbelief. That's not how permits work. The men finished bolting it down, then jumped back in the truck and drove off. Karen stood proudly beside her shiny new dish like a queen on Coronation Day. See, she called out. Now it's fair. I didn't even bother replying. I just called Harris. When he arrived the next morning, he was laughing before he even stepped out of the SUV. You weren't kidding, he said, looking at Karen's setup. That's a high-powered transmitter. She's probably broadcasting straight into her Wi-Fi router. Can that interfere with mine? Oh, definitely, he said. And if it does, she's technically committing a federal offense. Of course she is, I muttered. Sure enough, by noon, the NOAA system registered signal distortion. Harris confirmed it on his laptop. Her dish is emitting on restricted frequencies. We're documenting it. Right on cue, Karen came marching out, arms folded. You can't touch my property, she said. This is my right as a homeowner. Ma'am, Harris said calmly, you're operating illegal transmission equipment. That's a violation of federal communication codes. It's not illegal, she snapped. I built it myself. Harris blinked. You built it? From YouTube, she said proudly. He sighed. That explains everything. Within an hour, local police arrived again, third time in 2 weeks. The officers took statements, photographed the dish, and warned Karen that if she didn't dismantle it voluntarily, they'd seize it as evidence of unauthorized transmission. Karen's confidence finally cracked. You're all in on this, she hissed. You and him, this is harassment. You can't silence me. Ma'am, one of the officers said patiently, no one's silencing you. We're just trying to stop you from accidentally jamming aviation frequencies. She blinked. Aviation frequencies? Yes, ma'am, the officer said. You could knock out a plane's navigation signal. Her face drained of color. That's not my fault. He provoked me. Harris handed her a form. Sign this, and we'll forget this happened. She hesitated for a long moment, then scribbled her name with a trembling hand. As they unbolted her makeshift dish, she glared at me across the yard. This isn't over, she said quietly. You think you're smarter than everyone else, but I'll find a way. I'm counting on it, I said. You're very creative. The truck drove away with her equipment, and the neighborhood was silent again. For the first time in weeks, I sat on the porch and felt genuine relief. It wasn't victory exactly, it was more like the eye of a hurricane. Because if I'd learned one thing about Karen, it was that she didn't need logic to keep fighting. She just needed a cause. And with her toy dish gone, she'd go looking for another one. And that's when I realized, she didn't care about the dish at all anymore. She cared about winning. The war wasn't about property lines or satellites now. It was about pride. And people like Karen don't stop until they've destroyed something, usually themselves. 3 days passed before Karen resurfaced, and those 3 days were almost blissful, like the neighborhood had been cleansed of static. The mail came without threat. The HOA chat was silent. Even the air felt lighter. But peace in Karen's orbit is never permanent. It's just the inhale before the scream. On the morning of the 4th day, I noticed something new. A pair of orange utility flags sticking out of the grass near the property line. One on my side, one on hers. At first, I thought maybe the city had marked a line for repairs. Then I saw the handwritten note taped to my mailbox. Notice of property review, boundary dispute initiated. Of course, she was moving the battle to the ground, literally. I went out, holding the paper up. Karen was standing in her driveway, phone in one hand, tape measure in the other, her face set in that smug expression that always meant trouble. Morning, I called. New project. She didn't even look up. Just confirming my lot dimensions. Turns out your fence is 22 inches over my property line. I stared at her. That's funny. The city surveyor says otherwise. She smirked. Well, maybe your little federal friends bribed him. I laughed. You think NOAA handles real estate? I think you'll be surprised how many agencies cover for each other. She waved the tape measure like a sword. I'm filing for encroachment. You'll have to move the fence, or I will. Karen, I said, stepping closer, you really don't want to mess with that fence. It's sensor-linked. That made her pause. Sensor-linked? Yeah, I said casually. Anything that crosses that line triggers a federal geofence alert. It's mostly for wildlife monitoring, but, well, you know how it is with data systems. They record everything. Her confidence flickered just for a second. You're bluffing. Try me. She squinted, studying my face for any hint of deceit, then huffed and stormed back into her house. By evening, the flags were gone. I figured maybe, just maybe, she'd realized she was out of her depth. But that hope died around midnight when I was jolted awake by the roar of machinery. I ran to the window. A small excavator was idling on Karen's side of the yard, its floodlights cutting through the darkness. Karen stood beside it in a reflective vest, holding blueprints. You've got to be kidding me. I threw on a jacket and went outside. Karen, what the hell are you doing? She turned, her grin wide and unhinged. You said it was a federal zone, so I'm proving it's not. My cousin works in construction, he's helping me dig up the boundary markers. Karen, it's midnight. Exactly. Less traffic. Her cousin, a scruffy man who looked like he regretted every decision leading up to this one, shrugged at me. She paid me cash, man. Said it was an emergency. Turn it off, I said. Now. Karen planted her feet. You can't stop me. This is my property, and I have every right to determine where my land begins. I sighed. Fine. I held up my phone and opened the NOAA app. You might want to step back. She frowned. Why? Because the system doesn't like heavy machinery near the geofence. Right on cue, a shrill alarm pierced the night. The excavator's floodlights flickered. Karen jumped, startled. What is that? That, I said, is your wake-up call. Within minutes, Harris's SUV pulled up, again. This time, he didn't even look surprised. You're really building a highlight reel for us, aren't you? He muttered as he approached. Karen pointed at him wildly. You can't keep intimidating me. I'm exercising my rights. Harris sighed, rubbing his temple. Ms. Porter, if this machinery had damaged any of the ground sensors, you'd be facing charges for tampering with federal data collection. She blinked. Data collection? You're digging up my land. He gestured at the excavator's bucket. You're the one digging. Her cousin shut off the engine, muttering, I'm out. Not worth it. He climbed into his pickup and drove away, leaving Karen standing there alone, framed in harsh light, her face pale and furious. This is harassment, she snapped. Karen, I said, you're literally the one trespassing again. She jabbed a finger toward me. You're the reason this neighborhood is a mess. Before you came here, it was peaceful. Now there are sirens, agents, and cameras everywhere. Maybe that's because you keep calling them, I said. Her mouth trembled. You think you're so clever, she spat. But one day, they'll see who you really are. Harris looked at me. We're done here. I'll file the incident report. Don't engage. Karen stormed off into her house, slamming the door. Harris leaned closer. We're preparing an injunction, he said. If she keeps escalating, she'll end up with a criminal record. Knowing her, I said, she'll treat that as a badge of honor. The next morning, the excavator was gone, but a deep trench cut across the edge of her lawn, crooked, uneven, and ugly. She'd stopped digging right where the geofence started. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe my little bluff had worked after all. By noon, though, she proved me wrong. I came home from a supply run to find my porch covered in mail. Not regular mail, but copies of printed flyers. Warning: suspicious government activity in residential zone. Each one featured a grainy zoomed-in photo of my dish and a paragraph accusing me of harboring surveillance hardware. She'd plastered them across mailboxes, lampposts, and even the bulletin board by the community pool. Greg called almost immediately. You see this crap? Yeah, I said. She's running her own propaganda ministry now. She's losing it, he muttered. Half the neighborhood thinks she's completely unhinged. The other half's scared to take sides. And she's claiming she's going to the media. She already did, I said. Remember the last time? It backfired. Greg groaned. You don't understand. She's threatening to contact a local news blogger who lives for conspiracy stories. If that happens, you'll have people camping outside your house looking for UFOs. I leaned back in my chair. Then maybe it's time we gave them a show. What do you mean? I mean, if Karen wants to turn this into theater, I'll make sure she gets the front-row experience she deserves. That night, I set up my counterattack. With Harris's help, I installed 2 harmless, but very dramatic, blue LED beacons near the base of the dish. They glowed faintly in the dark, pulsing like heartbeat lights. Then, using a small speaker tied to the security system, I programmed a low-frequency hum that played for 10 seconds every time motion was detected near the fence line. It wasn't dangerous, but it sounded ominous. By midnight, I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, waiting. Karen emerged from her house, phone flashlight cutting through the dark. "What are those lights?" she shouted. "You can't install more equipment." I sipped my coffee. "Federal upgrade. They're blinking." "Monitoring pulse," I said casually. "Detects interference." The hum started, a deep vibrating tone that echoed across the lawns. Karen froze, her flashlight trembling. "What's that noise?" she whispered. "That's the system registering motion," I said. "Don't worry, it only tracks for about a mile radius." Her mouth dropped open. "A mile. Give or take." She backed away, muttering something about illegal frequencies and lawsuits. Then she darted back into her house and slammed the door. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. By morning, the rumor had already spread. The HOA group chat was full of wild theories, everything from secret weather control devices to experimental radar. Someone even posted, "Can confirm lights pulsing near Reynolds's house at 2 a.m. Might be government testing." Karen, predictably, doubled down. She called for another emergency meeting that evening, claiming she had proof of hazardous emissions. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the tension was thick. Karen stood at the front with a small Geiger counter she'd bought online, waving it dramatically as it beeped intermittently. "See," she declared. "It's detecting radiation. He's endangering our community." Greg looked exhausted. "Karen, that's a smoke detector sensor, not a radiation meter." She blinked, then looked at the device, confused. "It says counter on it." "Yeah," I said. "Counterfeit." The room erupted in laughter. Karen's face turned red, then purple. "You all think this is funny? You'll see what happens when this whole neighborhood is on the news." "You already tried that," I said. "Remember the last reporter? He titled it Local HOA Declares War on Weather Satellites." The laughter got louder. Even the old couple from across the street were chuckling. Karen looked around, realizing she'd lost them all. The power, the control, it was gone. Her shoulders sagged. For the first time, she looked small. But then her eyes met mine, and I saw something shift behind them. Not defeat, resolve. The dangerous kind. "You think you've won," she said softly. "But you haven't. You humiliated me in front of everyone. And people like me don't forget that." She turned and walked out, the Geiger counter still chirping in her hand. Greg sighed. "She's not going to stop, is she?" "No," I said quietly. "But soon, she won't have a choice." Because I knew what Harris had told me earlier that day. NOAA had officially referred her repeated interference to federal prosecutors. There was a hearing scheduled. And when that news hit her doorstep, Karen wouldn't just be facing me. She'd be facing the United States government. When the certified envelope landed in Karen's mailbox, it was a bright Saturday morning, the kind that normally filled the street with lawnmowers and laughter. Instead, the neighborhood seemed to pause. Everyone saw the seal on that envelope. U.S. Department of Commerce, Office of Satellite Security and Enforcement. Even from across the street, I could see the moment she opened it. Her face went through 3 distinct shades: shock, disbelief, and finally, that red flush of fury that always meant a storm was coming. She tore the letter in half right there on the sidewalk, then stomped toward my driveway like she was marching into battle. "You did this!" she shouted before I could even look up from my laptop. "You and your little government buddies." I sighed, closing my computer. "Karen, I didn't do anything. The Department of Commerce did. You earned this all on your own. They can't charge me for protecting my community." "Karen, you trespassed, vandalized, and interfered with federal equipment 3 separate times," I said, keeping my tone calm. "That's not community service. That's a hobby called felony." Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I'm not scared of you or them. I've already called a journalist. I'm telling my story before they twist it." "Good idea," I said. "Just make sure they spell tampering correctly." She glared, breathing hard. "You'll regret this, Michael. I don't care how long it takes." Then she turned, stomped back to her house, and slammed the door so hard the window panes rattled. For the rest of the day she was silent. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, some neighbors curious, some nervous, a few quietly relieved. Greg stopped by that evening, holding a cup of coffee and a look that was equal parts sympathy and disbelief. "You sure you want to stay here?" he asked. "She's officially unhinged now." I shrugged. "If I move, she wins. And besides, she's about to have bigger problems." He nodded slowly. "The hearing?" "Monday morning," I said. "Federal building downtown. NOAA's sending Harris to testify. If she ignores the summons, they'll issue a bench warrant." Greg whistled. "She's going to explode." He wasn't wrong. Sunday evening, she made her final move. I was on the porch again, habit by now, when I heard the unmistakable whine of a generator starting up next door. Then came a flicker of light across her driveway, brighter than anything she'd ever rigged before. I stood, walked to the fence, and froze. She'd rebuilt her dish. Not the same model, not even close. It looked like something cobbled together from spare parts, lawn equipment, and whatever she could salvage from her garage. Wires dangled everywhere. A massive floodlight pointed skyward like she was signaling the mothership. And sitting in the center of it all, proudly duct-taped to the base, was a hand-painted sign: Private Research, No Trespassing. I rubbed my temples. "Karen, what in God's name are you doing?" Her head popped up from behind the contraption, goggles on, hair frazzled. "You have your dish, I have mine. If the government wants a fight, I'll give them one." "Karen, that's not how federal hearings work." She flipped a switch. The floodlight flared, humming so loud I could feel the vibration in my chest. "I'll prove they're overstepping. I'll show everyone I'm not crazy." "You're about to blow a fuse," I said, stepping back. Too late. A spark jumped from the wiring, followed by a loud pop. The light died instantly. For a few seconds, everything was quiet except for the faint crackle of ozone. Then, from her yard, a wisp of smoke curled into the air. "Karen!" I shouted, running toward the fence. "Turn it off!" She stumbled backward, coughing, waving smoke away. "It's fine. It's—" There was another sharp crack, followed by a hiss and a puff of blue smoke from the generator. The street lights flickered. Somewhere down the block, a transformer let out a metallic thunk. And then the sirens started again. 2 fire trucks, a police cruiser, and, because irony never sleeps, another black NOAA SUV. The whole street lit up in red and blue. Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones out, recording. Harris was the first out of the SUV, looking both exhausted and unsurprised. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Karen stood in her yard, covered in soot, clutching her melted extension cord like a banner. "They sabotaged me," she shouted at the firefighters. "They're trying to make me look insane." "Karen," I said, "you're doing a great job of that all by yourself." The firefighters shut off the generator and sprayed the smoldering patch of grass. The police took statements, and Harris walked over to me, rubbing his temple. "We'll add this to the report. She's officially on record for reckless interference and property endangerment." I nodded, staring at Karen as she paced, still ranting about conspiracies. "What happens next?" "She'll face federal charges if she keeps pushing. Honestly, they'll probably give her a plea deal, mandatory counseling, fines, probation." "That might actually help her," I said quietly. Harris gave me a look. "You're a better man than me." When they finally left, the neighborhood slowly returned to silence. Karen's yard was a blackened mess of burnt cables and melted plastic. She disappeared inside, and for the first time in months, her windows went dark. No porch lights, no shouting, no flyers. Just stillness. By Monday morning, she didn't show up for her hearing. Harris called me from the courthouse. Bench warrant issued. They'll bring her in for questioning. I didn't celebrate. It didn't feel like victory, just inevitability. That night, I sat on the porch again, staring at the now empty spot where her research dish had been. The air felt lighter, the stars clearer. For the first time in a long time, I could actually hear the crickets again. Then I saw movement across the street. Greg walked over, holding 2 beers. "You look like a man who's seen a ghost," he said. "Something like that," I said, taking one. "You think she's gone for good?" "She'll be back," I said. "People like her don't know when to quit. But maybe this time, someone will make her stop before she hurts herself, or anyone else." He nodded, then grinned. "You realize this whole saga's going to become neighborhood legend, right? 20 years from now, kids will dare each other to say her name 3 times. I laughed. The ghost of HOA passed. We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind. Then I noticed the faint blinking of the blue LEDs by my dish, the heartbeat lights. They pulsed softly, steady and calm. For the first time, I didn't feel tense when I saw them. They weren't warnings anymore, they were just reminders. Boundaries mattered, and sometimes you had to defend them, not with anger, but with patience. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the NOAA monitoring app on my phone, checking the sensor logs. Everything was normal except for one recent ping, time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. the night before. I frowned. That was after the generator fire. The log note read, "Unauthorized field interference detected, signal origin, Porter's property." Even burned out, her setup had managed to trip the system one last time. I stared at it for a moment, then closed the app and set the phone down. "Goodbye, Karen," I murmured. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, Greg told me the HOA had finally voted to dissolve the enforcement subcommittee, Karen's old power base. "No more random fines, no more nonsense," he said proudly. People realized how toxic it had gotten. You kind of forced a reckoning. "Glad something good came out of it," I said. Then, one morning in early fall, I found a letter on my porch. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Those tight, sharp letters, half printed, half scribbled. It read, "You think you won. But sometimes being right isn't the same as being good. One day you'll understand what you cost me." No signature. Just that. I folded the paper, slipped it into a drawer, and left it there. Because maybe, in her mind, she really believed that. Maybe she'd convinced herself she was the hero of her story. And that's the thing about people like Karen. They never think they're villains. They think they're fixing something. Restoring order. Defending what's theirs. But in the end, all they ever do is destroy the peace they claim to protect. Weeks turned into months. The dish stayed up, quiet and unbothered. The data flowed. The neighborhood found its rhythm again. The only trace of Karen was the burned patch on her lawn, which eventually grew over with new grass. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimmer of silver down the highway, an SUV, maybe hers, maybe not, but I'd stop myself from looking too hard. Because whatever she was doing now, it wasn't my story anymore. Mine was about what came after. The calm, the clarity, the way silence feels when it finally returns. And on those quiet nights, when the lights on the dish blinked in rhythm with the stars, I'd remember how fast a small act of entitlement can spiral into chaos. All it takes is one person who can't stand the idea that the world doesn't revolve around them. And all it takes to stop them, sometimes, is patience, proof, and the knowledge that, eventually, gravity catches up to everyone. Especially people like Karen.